Alright, are we rolling? Alright, so this video was gonna be a little bit different. I'm not gonna talk about plants and animals today. I am going to share a little bit of some personal things about myself. And this is gonna get really heavy. And this is gonna be a hard video to make, and it's probably gonna be a hard video for people to watch. But I feel like this is an important thing to talk about. And it was prompted by one of my friends posting something on Facebook. Um, and so we're going to talk a little bit about dementia. We're going to talk a little bit about family conflict. We're going to talk a little bit about trauma. So if this is going to trigger you, I don't recommend you watch this video. Um, I'm not saying that I'm not going to make this video for attention, pity, blah, blah, blah. I'm making this video for awareness. I'm making this video because I want people to feel less alone, and just for people to have a little bit of a better idea about just everything in life. So, um, let's see. I am 27 now, and back when I was a kid, I basically one of my we all four grandparents. One of my grandparents, my grandfather on my father's side, died of cancer like a couple of weeks before I was born, so I never knew him. All my grandparents are dead now. My last grandparent, my father's mother, my grandmother, my father's side, she died a couple of months ago. So I'm now like officially grandparentless, this and that. On my mother's side, my two grandparents lived about a mile down the road from us. So we were constantly with my mother's parents, my sister and I, growing up, because my mother would work, my mother's parents would watch us. They lived a mile down the street, so we were always with them. And I loved them. They were very nice people. All things considered. And I remember, my grandfather would always grow tomatoes, and he had a compost pile in the backyard. And one year, he got sick, and I decided to plant a few tomato plants in his compost pile, and they grew like 6 feet in that season. It was amazing. They just got huge. So every year after that, he decided to plant the tomatoes within the compost pile. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. My grandmother developed cancer, breast cancer, that metastasized throughout her body back in, I don't know, it was like 2010, 2011-ish. And she died in 2011. And meanwhile, her husband, my grandfather, my mother's father, started showing signs of dementia a couple of years prior to this. So, it started, he would forget things. He was in his mid 80s at the time. He'd forget things. He'd be, a little clumsy or things like that. The thing is, with dementia, what I have found is that it's not a linear progression of the disease. Somebody with dementia will start showing symptoms, and the symptoms will gradually get worse for several months. But then they'll plateau, and they'll stay at that level of functionality or disease level, blah, 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 for several more months before the symptoms progress again. And I say this from, I know this from experience. I've had a couple of relatives who have had dementia and have since died. This was, very evident. They developed some symptoms, but then the symptomatology paused for some time. That's how dementia kind of works in my experience. And again, I'm not an expert on this. I study plant-insect interactions and orchid development. I don't study brain, blah, blah, blah. But, my grandfather on my mother's side, was starting to deteriorate because he was losing control of his faculties. And I was still a kid. And when my grandmother got really sick, she fell off the bed one day and got hospitalized. And at the time, we didn't know, but, a couple of weeks later, she died in the hospital. But at first, it was she just went to the hospital to be checked out. She had been undergoing chemo for a while, and they thought that the cancer had kind of receded. One of the things about elderly people and cancer is chemo can actually do more harm than good, and you generally don't want to keep an old person on chemo for longer than is absolutely necessary. And that can cause some issues because um, there is always a chance that some of the cancer gets undetected and then it comes back. And that's what happened to my grandmother. Um, so, anyway, she got really sick. And I ended up being the one to take care of my elderly grandfather who was really starting to go downhill from dementia. Um, and, I was 14 at the time. And what I wanted to talk about was sort of how that whole thing has really altered me. And I don't want this to be, sorry, my computer just keeps giving me notification after notification. Um, this isn't necessarily supposed to be a, like, let's rally against everybody who's disabled and sick because it's inconvenient for other people. This is more of a, this is a disease that can ravage an entire family. This is something that's really, really bad for everybody involved. And, like, he got to die from, well, he didn't die of dementia, he died of pneumonia. That's a different matter. He got to die, and I have to live with just everything that happened before he died. Um, and there is a lot there. So it's really hard to see somebody who you love and who you looked up to and this and that slowly become completely helpless, unable to be somebody who can handle their own life. Um, and, you get afraid that you're going to turn into that. You get afraid that if you live long enough, you're going to be the one harming somebody else, being someone who, I don't want to say is a burden, but is, someone. One of the things that happens in these sorts of situations is other family members start to mistreat the person who's in charge of looking after the sick person. That's what happens, and that happened to me. Um, and I still get recurring nightmares about everything that happened during that time frame. And I get into like a paranoid state where like, is this really over? Am I going to be put back in this situation? I get really worked up about it, and I've been living in kind of constant fear of these sorts of situations since it all went down. Um, and this is a very devastating disease, especially for the person who's experiencing it. And you kind of feel helpless. You feel like, hey, I'm just here extending this person's suffering by giving them food, medicine, making sure they are clean, this and that. And you start to doubt yourself because everybody around you is telling you you're not doing enough. You're not doing the job you're supposed to be doing. You are, a failure, this and that. And you start to feel like, everything is hopeless, everything's helpless. There is a lot of doubt, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's really, really scary. There's stuff that kind of hurts everyone. The person who's suffering from dementia, I can only imagine what sorts of pain that causes the person with dementia. I can only imagine what happens for that person who is, you know, unable to remember simple things, unable to go, make it to the bathroom on time. It affects more than just your memory. It affects all your, faculties. Unable to stay awake for very long, even though the TV is blasting. Unable to recognize that, like, it's 85 degrees in the house and everybody's overheating. Unable to, you know, he would randomly get up in the middle of the night and open all the doors. Um, and I would hear it, and so I was always in fear, and I would be moving around the house, closing the doors after the fact to make sure that people wouldn't come into the house at night. Um, and things like that. He would randomly fall, which was really tantalizing. Um, and there would be times where you know, things would be in random places in the house, and you have to be careful. And like, there are times with this where like you have to lock up the pills, you have to lock up the car keys, things like that. And it's unfortunate, and I don't want to make light of any of this. It's really a scary situation for anybody, especially when you're a child, being the one that's grasping at straws, trying to solve the problem, trying to take care of the person, trying to you know what to do right and things like that. um and it's a really scary thing that happens, and you start to think like, you know I myself need to die before I get to that point, before I'm so old that I'm unable to watch after myself. And anything in my life that like I'm afraid to ask for help because I don't want to burden anybody with my shit. I'm afraid to be slow, lazy, take a break, this and that. I'm always on edge, and it's really a bad situation for everybody. And so I just wanted people to kind of be aware of you know what these diseases do to everyone. And you know is that my roommate? Whatever. I figured I would just put that out there.